Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today we're going to be looking at some new information regarding Final Fantasy XVI DLC that comes out of a Famitsu interview with DLC director Kujiraoka, producer Yoshi P, and director Hiroshi Takai. Now before I go any further, a couple of disclaimers. One, it is unavoidable that there will be spoilers in this video. You cannot talk about Final Fantasy XVI after its release without inevitably spoiling certain things. So you've been warned now to click away if you haven't played yet and you don't want to know anything else. Second of all, of course, thanks to @itakamochi on Twitter. She's like an honorary second member of the channel with how often we reference her translations. She translated these about a week ago, but have been dealing with internet issues, so I'm just getting around to it now. Without further ado, let's take a look at some of the things they had to say about the upcoming Rising Tide DLC and an interesting comment about the eventual PC version. So a lot of the more major comments are very surface level. They're things that we've already figured out just from watching the trailer, but they're just comments that they felt they needed to make about the overall context of the DLC itself. Of course, all the main characters, Clive, Jill, and Joshua, I almost said Jive there, will finally be able to journey together under blue skies. Now, they do mention in another interview, specifically in the one posted on the Square Enix blog, that this is very different because the sky is all purple at the time of doing this DLC because of Primogenesis. So they say that's a big mystery as to why that's happening. Some speculate that it's an island in the sky. Some speculate that it's somehow held underwater. Fitting. Whatever it may be, that's going to be one of the major mysteries we will be uncovering. Speaking of other things we'll be uncovering, betwixt all of the mysteries in the DLC, they make a special comment that Clive is actually going to have a more gentle sense than you've seen at this point in the story. At this point, he's been gung-ho on action and trying to deal with the issue in front of him, but despite this taking place near the end of Final Fantasy XVI story, but before its ultimate climax, he is going to have a gentler side to himself. May just be necessary given the condition of whatever's happening here in Mysidia. Now, speaking of Mysidia, they do make mention that it's a very fantasy-themed place, even though the story takes place before the ending of the game. That's a special comment to those of you who watch the post-credit scene and wonder if that's more the fantasy setting that you might be expecting. It's apparently going to have a very similar feel to that. Now this makes sense. Mysidia, for those of you who don't know, is originated from Final Fantasy II. And yes, I do mean the original Final Fantasy II, not Final Fantasy IV, which is also Final Fantasy II. And so it being more fantasy-esque makes a lot of sense. Yes, it has featured in the franchise since then, but it's worth mentioning where its originations come from. They also mention how you can use the photo mode to take these pictures under the blue sky, but it is what it is. They're basically just saying that with this better environment, you might be able to get better pictures of your favorite characters. Now, moving on to the DLC itself, being the second and only other planned DLC for Final Fantasy XVI, many are wondering about its level of difficulty. Now, the Echoes of the Fallen DLC is by no stretch of the imagination much harder than the base game. However, I'd say its average challenge compared to most other things in the base game would generally be considered higher, especially if you're someone uncomfortable with action games. With that being said, they expect Leviathan's DLC level of difficulty will be on par, if not harder, than Omega. Yoshi P says even he had trouble with it. Now that's something that's especially interesting given we know that Leviathan's power is considered quite a powerful one by the dev team itself. So knowing that you'll have access to that and still claiming it will have that level of challenge definitely holds a degree of interest in me that's, I guess, a little more so. The question is when we'll obtain it, because you'd expect that you would obtain Leviathan's power after completing the entire DLC versus having it throughout the entirety of the DLC, which of course you would probably be able to replay in some measure. But if its level of difficulty is on par or even a little harder than Omega, that's definitely welcome. I think that's one of Final Fantasy XVI's weaknesses, is that outside of playing on the Ultimaniac difficulty, you really don't get that level of challenge unless you're very unfamiliar with action games, in which case it actually does feel quite adequate. I watched a lot of people play through the game who don't normally play these style of games, and they had plenty of game overs as people who were unfamiliar. So this is probably welcome news and extends the value of that $25 expansion pass. We also know from other comments that it's about 8 to 10 hours, with 8 hours focusing solely on the Leviathan DLC and 2 hours of additional content. I don't know what that is, but I'm still suspecting that there will be a true ending, especially after comments that were made on the official blog, which we covered in the last video that I made about this topic. Now, the last comment that is translated by Audrey @itakamochi is one that has some interesting implications. I guess it depends on how you read it or how you decide the full translation really works out. But she says they really jam-packed a ton of action battle elements into the Icon fight as well as the last boss fight of the Leviathan DLC. So it sounds like Leviathan themselves may not be the final battle, and I believe Audrey even posts some similar concerns about that exact comment, but it just, I guess we're just not really sure. Either way, we didn't get an icon fight with Echoes of the Fallen, and as such, people are going to really be looking forward to the Ifrit versus Leviathan fight that is teased in the DLC trailer. Now, there were some additional comments that were made, one about the Final Fantasy XIV and 16 collaboration, and one about a potential new feature if the PC version does well, specifically if it does well. Now, for the Final Fantasy XIV and 16 collaboration, there's the question of course, will Final Fantasy 16 get anything on behalf of Final Fantasy XIV? He mentions that while it may be alienating to PC players, that they're not ruling out anything in the future, so it makes it sound like it's not a certainty that 16 will get something, which is really odd to me. It's hard to tell when Yoshi P is just being diplomatic and not trying to overpromise versus just trying to kind of lessen the blow of them not making a decision that I think he knows a lot of people want. They now have a costume system in Final Fantasy 16. We've got weapons from Final Fantasies 1, 3, 7. They've clearly shown that they're willing to collaborate on some level, and I just can't imagine not having something from Final Fantasy 14 on the side of 16. Do I expect it to be nearly to the level of what we saw, for example, in Final Fantasy 15's collaboration with the Garuda fight? Actually, now that I've pondered that, yeah, I do. That is the kind of level I would expect, but bare minimum I would expect like an Ardbert outfit, maybe the Bravura axe, even though it's generally not the way that Clive wields weapons and it would be a little strange, but something iconic to Final Fantasy XIV making its way in there just feels like it should happen. And thus, regardless of whether it's alienating, which doesn't make any sense because they will be releasing a PC version, just apparently not till after the collaboration based on that comment, shouldn't really matter. It'll be something they can look forward to in the future. Same way with Final Fantasy 15, you can still go through the collaboration content now, even though it's, it took a while before and that was available on all platforms. So I'm just saying they might as well go through with it. Now, speaking of the PC version, the final comment that I've seen translated at the very least is in regard to if the PC version does well, there's one additional feature they'd like to add. They might consider making Cid, Jill, or other characters playable as a bonus. However, this is all up in the air as of now. Now, it's funny because Audrey follows this up by saying she hopes it does well so you can get playable Cid and Jill. I am more of the understanding this won't even be necessary because they will be playable within a week, probably less, by the PC modding community, as if they're not going to immediately rip all of the combat data out for these characters and make it work. I've seen enough Kingdom Hearts mods and remixes to know that if a community wants characters to be playable, it's gonna happen. Heck, Virgil was playable in Devil May Cry 5 way before Virgil's official DLC actually came out. So this may be something they deem they don't even need to do, though having it on some official level is a little bit better than saying, yeah, just go mod it in. I'm not saying they shouldn't do this, I just think it's funny that that's what it's contingent on, when by the time they do consider doing this, anyone who wanted to play as them is likely to have found a method of doing it already. And that wraps up all the comments I could find, at least the ones translated by Audrey over on Twitter in regards to the contents of the Famitsu interview. So that's going to be a wrap for the video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I'll keep you in the loop about everything 16 related as it comes up. And some of you are still wondering, when's he going to react to the 7 Rebirth trailer? I still haven't seen it. I have kept that surprise. It is coming soon, I promise. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.